From Wall Street to Main Street to help small business owners have the same capital as corporate America and give them the same resources as a larger company. We cover business funding, business credit, scaling, business consulting, and much more. Check out the website at shieldadvisorygroup.com. Welcome to the show, The Liquid Lunch Project.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Liquid Lunch Project. I am Matthew R. Meehan, alongside my partner, the Professor Luigi Rosa Bianca. What's on tap today, Lou?
Matt, get ready for this one, buddy, because today we have a special guest, and she is going to explain to us this new, unique, and revolutionary perspective on the modern workplace. Tara May is the CEO and founder of Aspiritech. And the wonderful thing about Aspiritech is almost her entire staff is neurodiverse. So Tara, welcome to the podcast. And let's start with a little glossary of words. Explain to the audience what neurodiverse means and how that applies to staffing.
Thank you so much for setting me up to introduce the concept because it's important, right? So first, I like to define neurodiversity. It is the concept that every single one of our brains works differently. All three of us have different brains, right? And our brains impact everything about the way we experience the world, the way we learn, the way we socialize, who we fall in love with, and certainly how we work. About 80% of us are what we call neurotypical, meaning our brains work roughly like everybody else's. And then about 20% of us are what we call neurodivergent, which means our brains are so different that we actually put a label or a diagnosis on it. And this is things like autism, ADHD, OCD, Tourette's, but it can also be things like PTSD or anxiety and depression, where something has happened in our life that is so traumatic that it makes our brains work differently, right? And so neurodiversity is this grand concept that we should embrace all the different kinds of brains in the world.
Now, how do you work with neurodivergent folks in assimilating them into the workspace? Like, what has to happen differently with someone that is neurotypical versus neurodivergent?
So Aspiritech specifically focuses on autistic team members. So 93% of our incredible team is diagnosed as autistic, and that's our mission, right? Meaningful employment for those team members. But the truth is, autistic and neurodivergent team members, they're existing at every workplace, everywhere, and they're assimilating often with no support at all. What we try to do is flip that on its head and provide an environment where we're taking away the stigma of needing support. And every single one of us, we're all humans. We all need support. We all have needs. And there is absolutely no shame in that. So in our workplace, we openly talk about things like mental health. We openly talk about things like struggling with communication or needing help with conflict resolution. We openly talk about things like executive functioning and needing help with staying organized or keeping our schedule on track. And when I came to Aspiritech after 25 years in the corporate workplace, I thought to myself, every organization could benefit from openly talking about those really critical concepts that we often just struggle with in silence.
So explain to us how that works on a daily basis. See, Matt and I met in the canyons of Wall Street 25 years ago, and our first employers were the first generation to walk upright, and they stepped out of caves into offices. And that was the communication skills they brought to the workspace. There was no ROI of kindness. It was unga bunga, you're late, go get me some coffee. So how give us a typical day at Aspiritech.
So I want to first relate to what you're saying, because I came from newspapers, and newspapers, very archaic. very old school way of thinking, very male, heavily male editors, male leaders everywhere, right? And I think actually my first male editor told me I was too nice to be a good journalist. And I carried that with me, but it turns out being a kind human actually made me a really good journalist because people like to open up to me. And I got all sorts of stories that way that other people didn't get, right? So I relate to what you're saying. And what I have come to believe over the past 25 years is that you can create more cultural change, more revenue, more innovation through treating people well and understanding that they are humans 24 hours a day, and that doesn't go away from 9 to 5 in a workplace, then you can by dictating to people what they should do. Innovation, growth, and transformation comes from the bottom up in an organization. People have to buy in to the change that you want. And we see that at Aspiritech. So I'm going to give you a hard example. We grew our revenue by 46% over the past year.
Wow.
And we did not do that by treating people badly, by expecting them to work 24 hours a day. We did it by valuing their mental health, by supporting them, by empowering them, by asking them what they needed to be successful day in and day out, and doing our best to give it to them, right? That is a incredible, fantastic transformation story and revenue story. And that is rooted in supporting mental health in the workplace, supporting different kinds of brains in the workplace, and being kind, not being dictatorial. And I believe that shift in leadership style is imperative in 2025. We move not just at the pace of digital, at the pace of AI. And if you expect humans to innovate and move at that pace, you have to understand the perspective from which they are coming.
Now, I understand that at Aspiritech, you don't just stop with the bottom line, you take it a step further because Aspiritech has also instituted an academy. Tell the audience a little bit about the academy and how, if they're so inclined, maybe they can donate to it.
Absolutely. And certainly we will always say yes to that. So in addition to being a tech services company where we do quality assurance, web development, AI and large language model building, accessibility testing, we have discovered that we have a really great knack for training autistic people to be successful in those careers outside of Aspiritech. So we created an academy where people can learn both the hard skills and the soft skills that will prepare them to be an autistic job seeker and productive member of the workforce. And we offer that for free to autistic job seekers all over the United States. So it's a way for us to extend our mission beyond the walls of our employees, and we're really proud of it.
Now, is the academy, is it an online academy or is it in person?
It is. It's completely remote. It's done through a learning management system, and it is completely supported and guided by our inclusion team at Aspiritech.
Okay, can you?
Is part of the mission there to create like a normality for autistic adults? Like they can enter the workspace without that stigma that, oh, I can't get a job because I have some sort of neurodivergency.
Absolutely. And we actually work with other companies to give them training and consulting on becoming inclusive to neurodivergent and autistic people at their own workplaces. And I just did a recent presentation with a pretty large HR team who then asked me to come in and give it to every manager and every leader at their company, because it was so powerful and eye-opening to talk about how resonant the experience of different kinds of brains is for all people and all employees.
Would you recommend a exercise like that for all companies?
Absolutely. 1 in 20 people, or 1 in every 5 people, or 20% of the population is neurodivergent, right? And so if you can understand the different kinds of brains you have on your team, you can help them work faster, work smarter, you can improve retention, you can improve employee engagement. And those factors all really hit the bottom line for organizations that are both small, large, and medium.
Now, when you started out, you guys were hiring for quality assurance jobs we had spoken about before. What made you believe that quality assurance was a great position to place autistic or other neurodivergent people in?
So it's interesting. You called me the founder of the organization. I'm actually not. The two founders were an amazing husband and wife team who founded Aspiritech in 2015, looking for work for their own adult son, who was working in retail, and that was not really commensurate with his abilities, potential, and intelligence. And so they started doing research and found that QA can be a fantastic match for many autistic brains. And it worked, right? They built this amazing company that grew to more than 100 employees today. And when they retired, because they were well in their 70s and deserved to, the board went out in search of someone. I came in and I was that person. And what I saw was that they had not only built a great match in QA, they had built an environment where autistic people can be successful at whatever their talent or passions are. And we started to quickly expand. We now have autistic people in creative services, in HR, in sales and marketing. And those team members are successful at all those different areas because our environment encourages them to be so.
Yeah, it's as you were saying earlier, 20% of the population, right? That's a big number. That's a big number. And
Well, Tara, it seems like you're not working at a job. You've got a bit of a mission. How did your mission start?
Yes, I am so grateful to wake up every day and work for something that I believe in with my entire heart. My journey with neurodiversity started with my son. His first diagnosis at 2 was global developmental delay. This is a diagnosis a lot of neurodivergent children get from pediatricians, which basically means something is not quite right, but we don't know what it is yet, right? And it took him 3 more years until the age of 5 to get his autism diagnosis, because even a decade ago, our understanding of autism was very limited, and it continues to expand, and we continue to learn more about it all the time. But he was pre-verbal. He only had about a dozen words until he was 7 years old. So we learned to speak another language together, and through a lot of therapy and growth, I saw what he was capable of. And what I discovered with him and what he taught me was that he just needed to learn in a different way than most people. He was capable of absolutely anything and everything, but he needed different supports to do it. And so neurodiversity became, to me, like watching the night sky light up star by star, where I started to see it everywhere, right? In myself, in friends and family members and loved ones, but also at work and in my team members. And I started to see that if you could support all these different kind of brains intentionally, you could help people reach their fullest potential in a completely different way.
Tara, let's dig a little bit deeper and let's give the audience a chance to fully appreciate what's going on here. Besides what we know just in social settings, can you clarify for everyone specifically what autism medically and biologically is?
Absolutely. Although it is a tough struggle because the most brilliant of neuropsychologists and scientists struggle to define it specifically, right? But when we talk about an autism diagnosis, we are talking about someone's brain working differently in terms of socialization, learning, and sensory issues. So here's a great example. Autistic brains are often either hypersensitive or hyposensitive, meaning they either shy away from sensory experiences, for example, loud rooms, or they seek sensory experiences. So in my son, this manifested with him constantly clinging to me. He was hyposensitive and was constantly seeking sensory input, and he needed constant hugs, constant love, constant touching. And this caused a misdiagnosis because doctors were like, well, autistic people are hypersensitive. They shy away from that. So it's really complicated and complex, right? And often autistic women, for example, are completely misdiagnosed because it presents differently in women than it does in men. So it's a complicated way of the way our brains process and experience the world.
How have your experiences at Aspiritech made you a better mom, and how has the mom of your son given you better tools to run Aspiritech?
So I think that my son's diagnosis and life experience not only made me a better mom, I think it made me a better human. I am incredibly type A, hyper competitive, win, right? That's how I was born. That's how my brain works. It's how I function. And I had to relearn how to look at the world differently. So I'll give you a great example. So my son's a twin. He's a neurodivergent, and his twin, my other son, is completely neurotypical. We went to their preschool graduation. My neurotypical son ran off with all the other kids lined up for his preschool graduation. And my autistic son wouldn't go. He wouldn't leave. He wouldn't participate in his preschool graduation. He sobbed and clung to me. So I went into the audience, and I was crying, right? I'm a mom who's crying and is like, my son isn't going off to his preschool graduation, and I didn't know whatever his life was going to look like, and we weren't even sure that he was going to be able to handle kindergarten at that point. And the preschool teacher, the principal of the school, did the graduation ceremony, and at the end of it, gave a shout out to my autistic son in my arms and said, we wanted to recognize another graduate. And my son threw his arms up into the air and shouted to a room full of hundreds of people, yay, right? Just one word, yay. And I thought to myself in that moment, I have to reframe my expectations, because that moment was sweeter and more special than anything I could have asked for at the beginning of the night, going how I expected, right? And I think to myself often about that moment, that life is about reframing our expectations, because it isn't what we expect it to be.
And this was about 8 years ago, correct?
Yeah, it was 8 years ago.
So give us some insights on where your son is today.
Well, I'll tell you, because I had another tearful mom moment. He is about to head off to high school. He's in 8th grade. And in 8th grade, these students get a chance to go perform. The choir students get a chance to go perform on the high school stage. It's a big stage. And they go up there with every single one of the high school choir students. So there are about 500 students, high schoolers on this stage. And my son marched up there and looked so at home and so proud on that choir stage. And I turned around to my husband and I said, I never thought we would be here. I never thought this would happen. And here he is up there singing his autistic little heart out to the world. And I didn't know that that's what life was going to look like 10 years ago. And I remember asking the therapist, what is life going to look like? Is he going to go off to college? Is he going to be able to live independently? What is in store for us? And they said, we just don't know. And that's a hard answer to hear when you're a type A psycho planner like myself. But it turns out every year he shows me more and more of what he's capable of. And the team members at Aspiritech, they do the same. I have no doubt that they are capable of absolutely anything. And my biggest challenge as CEO is reminding them of that. The confidence struggles that come with being an autistic person who has been defined by their limitations their entire life, sometimes by well-meaning adults who love them very much, that is a complex trauma to undo and is absolutely my biggest challenge as a leader of this organization.
Tara, I apologize. What is your son's name?
Shauka.
Now, is it safe to assume if it wasn't for your experience with Shauka and this life experience, you're probably not at Aspiritech today?
It's 100% safe to assume that. And it's also 100% safe to assume that I had absolutely zero knowledge of autism, of neurodiversity, of any of these things before my son's diagnosis. And that's a darn shame, right? Because it opened up a world to me in a completely different way. But my understanding of autism, I think like many people's, was like Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man, right? I institutionalized people. I had no understanding. And now I understand complex brains in a really special way. I also understand my own brain differently, right? It's opened up a kindness to me and myself that I wasn't understanding or willing to give myself a decade ago. And I think the world could be a better place if we all understood it more deeply.
How did the two brothers get along?
I'll answer the question about the twins, and then we'll move on to the next question. So they are incredibly close in a way that only twins can be, and I can't possibly explain it to you, nor do I understand it myself. But I will tell you, I actually think that it made the neurotypical twin a much kinder and more understanding and empathetic person. He is one of the kindest people I've ever met. But it can also be a heavy weight for him sometimes. And we had to work through his own anxiety and perfectionist struggles. And I think sometimes when you have that dichotomy, it does create this desire to be like the perfect son because the other sibling has needs. And I have had to try to teach both of them that both of their needs matter and both of their needs are valuable. And really, that's what I try to teach the world, right? Is that we all have needs, and that isn't something to be ashamed of.
Autism, as far as I've been alive, has always seemed like it's on the rise. Do you think that's because it's becoming more diagnosed than ever before? Do you think we had as many neurodivergent people or autistic people back in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s? I think it's like 1 out of every 36 children right now are autistic, right?
Matt, I love that you asked this question and you clearly did your research before the podcast. And I appreciate that as well, because you are spot on. The diagnosis numbers from the CDC at this point say 1 in 36 children are being diagnosed as autistic. And I truly believe, and the science supports, that it is actually because we are getting much better at diagnosis and understanding what it looks like. My son likely would not have been diagnosed if I wasn't such a pushy advocate that we were struggling. I think he was misdiagnosed and would have been continued to be undiagnosed. But I'll give you another more specific example. My dad is dyslexic. Very seriously dyslexic. He was born in 1960, and his first diagnosis in 1965 in kindergarten was his teacher telling his mom that he was stupid. And that's often what diagnosis looked like for many neurodivergent kids in the 60s, 70s, and even 80s, right? And we have gotten much better in the education system at understanding how to support different brains and different needs in our children. And that has drastically changed the diagnosis rates of dyslexia, ADHD, autism, and the support systems that they get at school. We're still working on supporting people as employees and in workplaces, but education is really getting it right. And I believe employment will follow.
So my understanding is with autism, there's different varieties or different ranges on the spectrum, right? So how do you diagnose one side of the spectrum to the other side? I mean, if you look like Elon Musk, he came out and said he had Asperger's, which is autism, right?
Yes. Yes. So Asperger's is the vernacular for people who are diagnosed as autistic, but are on what used to be referred to as like high functioning Asperger's, right? And then there are other people who have much, much higher support needs, right? And this makes it difficult, right? I think you have people who are going to need lifelong support, and you have people who are capable of supporting themselves and working and making really significant contributions. And certainly Elon Musk is a very famous example, right? But what we try to remember is that you aren't a little bit autistic or not, right? You are going to have varying needs, and some people are going to have more needs than others, and some people are going to need different supports than others. But it can be really hard to think about that huge spectrum of autism and say, well, Elon Musk has absolutely nothing in common with a nonverbal autistic person. But the truth is, there are a lot of commonalities, right? There are a lot of significant sensory issues in all autistic people, right? They just manifest themselves differently. So when we think about it, we try to think about understanding the individual. And that is true whether it's an autism diagnosis, an ADHD diagnosis, or a human with no diagnosis at all who is going to have their own individual needs. But you're right, it is a difficult and complicated spectrum of realities.
So when they come to the academy now, do you have an idea based upon what their diagnosis is, where they start inside of the academy, or is everybody run through the same course?
So we offer the same curriculum with different supports. So I'll give you an example. We had a candidate come through who is incredibly articulate and intelligent, but was not able to verbally interview. So we did the entire interview in chat format. And this person articulated their thoughts beautifully and was one of the most successful graduates of the program, right? So that's a really specific example of how we get all sorts of different kinds of brains and needs, and we just try to accommodate it the absolute best that we can.
I love that. What are the plans? What's next? I mean, you're doing so much. I know what's next. I'm not going to share that. But where do you see the academy going? Where do you see Aspiritech going? Where do you see yourself going from here?
So we just continue to grow, right? I shared that we're roughly a $6 million organization today. I see no reason why we cannot be a $10 and $20 million organization. And we continue to expand our services, expand our team, expand our client base, and have significant success and growth. But I think even if we're able to employ 1,000 autistic adults, we're only putting a small dent in the unemployment crisis for autistic adults. 80% of autistic adults, according to the Department of Labor, are either under or unemployed. And so we are on a mission not only to grow our own revenue, employment, and mission-based work, but to help other organizations become conscientious and inclusive to their neurodivergent team members, because I think that's truly where we're going to be able to make a difference in a large scale way.
All right, so Tara, let's try to make a dent there. To the small business audience that is listening right now, if they have someone that is neurodivergent on their team, where can they get the tools to equip themselves in dealing with that staff member in an ideal fashion?
I love that question. So I think there are 3 recommendations I'm going to make. One is the most important, which is ask. Ask your team member what they need. And you can either have a diagnosis or not. You don't need one. To ask the team member what they need to be successful. It's the most important thing you can do as a leader, as a manager. 2, Google. Google is our friend. There's so much information out there. If you Google right now, neurodiversity and employment, autism and employment, supporting autistic team members, there are amazing resources out there. And it's new, it's a new concept, but it is emerging, and we are seeing people raise their hands and create resources. And 3, if you want to skip the Googling and go to something specific, Aspiritech.org has a ton of resources about supporting neurodivergent and autistic team members in the workplace and in life. We create them, we share them. It's part of our passion and our mission. And if you visit our website, you will find them in spades.
I think that's the ROI of kindness.
And you will see that return. You will see your organization benefit and thrive if you think about your team members as humans with needs and you figure out how to support them. I promise you.
Where can they find you on the socials, or what is your website so everybody knows?
www.aspiritech.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we have a beautiful blog, and we have a ton of resources, one-pagers, and information about supporting neurodiversity in the workplace. And we try to simplify it down to ways that are really easy to understand.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We want to be respectful of your time, right? We're also going to put all the literature inside of the show notes, so if everybody wants to get in touch with you, they can. And that's a wrap. The Liquid Lunch Project. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the show. And make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you on the next episode of The Liquid Lunch Project.